Good evening. We're ready to get started. Tonight we're learning Maseches, Pesachim, Daf Lamed Gimel, and as well Daf Lamed Dalet Amud Aleph. We're starting about 12 lines or so from the bottom of Lamed Beis Amud Beis from the words Ve'afra Papa Hadarbe, and we'll be ending about 10 lines from the bottom of Lamed Dalet Amud Aleph at the word Eisive. Yesterday we had a conversation in regards to Truma in general, that if one were to take Truma from a Kohen, so we said that they have to eat a kizayis, and then we saw the unique shiur of Abba Shaul, who said that it has to be a shava pruta. What was unclear about the opinion of Abba Shaul when he says that the food that you take has to at least be a shava pruta to be obligated in the punishment of eating truma, which is keren v'chomesh. So we didn't know if it was that he needed both. Does he have to have a kizayis that is a shava pruta, or a shava pruta even if it's not a kizayis? That was a machlokas still within Abba Shaul. And yesterday we saw the shita of Rav Papa that he says that Abba Shaul really means both. That Abba Shaul's shita is that we need to, in order to trigger the punishment of eating truma and getting the punishment of keren v'chomesh, of paying, if you stole 100 to pay 125. In order to get to that point, you need the food to be a kizayis, and as well you need the value of the food to be a shava pruta. So here the Gemara is starting off with a question on Rav Papa. Says the Gemara, 12 lines from the bottom of Lamed Beis Amud Beis, give or take a line or two. The Afra of Papa Hadarbe, Rav Papa went back on his own shita. We'll see what this means momentarily. Titania, the Brisa writes. The Brisa has a couple of parts here, 3 parts. First is the drasha, the chata'a bishkaga. A person does an avera d'oraisa b'shogeg, and there's a drasha in the Brisa that says prat lemezid, that the chatas is not brought when a person does something lemezid, a very well-known din. Says the Gemara, but wait a minute. Maybe we would have known this even without a pasuk. The Brisa reads, "V'halo dinhu." Maybe we have a din, which is code word for kal v'chomer in the Gemara. Maybe we have a din, we have a logic, we have a kal v'chomer. What would the logic be that would have circumvented the need for the pasuk to teach me that a prat lemezid, to teach me that a mezid is excluded from the world of korban chatas? Says the Gemara. Here's the logic: Uma she'ar mitzvos shechayev bahen kares poter bahen as hamezid. By mitzvos in general, the rule is that when someone is chayev kares, it exempts them from a mezid. Then meila she'ein ba kares, but meila which has no kares, but it does have a chiyuv misa, eino din shepoter as hamezid. So we already have a logic. We have a kal v'chomer that would indicate already without the pasuk. There's already a kal v'chomer that would indicate that the person who does the iser b'mezid would be pater. So why then do we need the pasuk? So the Gemara is now going to present 4 different rejections of the initial kal v'chomer. The kal v'chomer that we just learned is that by shar mitzvos, when there's a chiyuv kares, you're pater. So when it comes to our case of truma, when it comes to the case of meila, where there's a chiyuv misa, so then for sure you're going to be pater in a case of mezid. And then says the Gemara, rejection number 1. Version number 1 of the rejection, I should say, about 8 lines from the bottom, says Gemara, lo, that kal v'chomer does not work. This is all still part of the brisa. Imamris b'shar mitzvos, if you say by mitzvos in general, shekein lo chayiv bahen misa, with most mitzvos in the Torah, you're not chayiv misa. And when you violate an isra achila in the Torah, you're not chayiv, might be chayiv malkos. So Tomar, what would you say b'meila shechayiv ben misa? There's a chumrah, there's a stringency by the realm of meila, which undermines the kal v'chomer. The kal v'chomer assumes that we can apply the rule of meila all over the place. We can't. It has a unique chiddush to it, which is that it has a chiyuv misa, which other isurei achila don't have. Therefore, Talmud Lomar, 5 lines, 6 lines from the bottom, Talmud Lomar. Therefore, we need the pasuk bishkaga prat lemezid, end of the brisa. So we still don't yet know what this has to do with Rav Papa. We're not going to see what this has to do with Rav Papa until the top of the page, though. This will all be a multi-step question, a multi-staged question against Rav Papa. So right now we've seen the brisa. The brisa says we have a pasuk. Do we really need a pasuk? I have a kal v'chomer. Says the Gemara, your kal v'chomer is bad. Okay. So now we need the pasuk to teach us prat lemezid, that if a person does the iser deoraisa, they do a mezid on purpose by meila, by many isurim, you're going to be exempt from the consequence. We're now 5 lines from that. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak le Rav Chia bar Avin. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says there's something very strange about this brisa that we just learned. Hi Tana, the first part of the brisa, it seemed to be meikara in the beginning, lima le kares. It seemed to be that kares was more powerful. That was the first kal v'chomer, where we saw in the first kal v'chomer that kares was more powerful. Kares was what we used as our precedent to show us that when you do something b'mezid that you're exempt. But then ulevasof in the kal v'chomer that you're using to reject the initial kal v'chomer, there we showed that misa was more powerful than kares. Ulevasof alima le misa. You're showing now that misa is more powerful, and that's not true. Kares is more powerful. So when you're doing kal v'chomers, you have to know which one's kal and which one's chomer. If you don't know what you're talking about, your whole kal v'chomer is going to fall apart. So the first kal v'chomer assumed that kares was more powerful. The second kal v'chomer seems to say that misa is more powerful, and therefore, says Rav Nachman, something doesn't make sense. So therefore, we change the final kal v'chomer because we know that kares really is more powerful. It is the chamor between kares and misa. So ve'amar le hachi kamar. So Rav Chia bar Avin responds to Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak and says, really, that final kal v'chomer of the brisa was a mistake. And here's the second version. Lo. Im amres b'shar mitzvos shekem lo chai ben misa v'pachos mikazayis. By most isurim in the Torah, we have a parameter of achila that until you eat a shiur, the halacha is you're not going to be held accountable. You may have done an isser, but you may not have an onesh, right? Achati shiur is asur min Torah, but you might still have a problem with what you did at klape shmaya, but you will not have triggered necessarily an onesh. So that's true by most halachos in the Torah. However, tomar b'meila shechaya b'misa pachos mikazayis. We have something unique about meila, and this would be the second kal v'chomer of the brisa that rejects the first one, and therefore we need the pasuk. So this one is about chatzi shiur. The Amar Le, Rav Nachman says back to Rav Chia bar Avin, wow, thank you very much. Tanuach daitecha, you should rest easy. Shehinachta es daiti, because you gave me some calm. I didn't understand this brisa originally. The first kal v'chomer said that kares was more powerful than misa. The second kal v'chomer said that misa is more powerful than kares. Doesn't make any sense. You've given me a real answer. You gave me a real kal v'chomer. So even though Rav Chia bar Avin was the one who drafted this second kal v'chomer, he recognizes that other people don't like it. The Rabbi Rav Sheshes shadu bein narga. You know the phrase, they threw a wrench into it. So this is, they threw an axe into it. A similar platform. I don't know if we actually got it from here, but that's what the Gemara says, is that the shadu bein narga, that they threw a wrench into this second kal v'chomer. Sorry? Oh, thank you. V'amar le mai nichusa. What is your comfort? The Rabba v'Rav Sheshes shadu bein narga. Thank you. You shouldn't feel so comforted because Rabba and Rav Sheshes don't like this at all. Let's see why they don't like it. Seemingly an unrelated sugya for the moment, or a slightly disconnected case. Man shamas le da'amar hazy b'meila misa. Who is the one who holds, as we turn to the top of Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph, that if a person does meila b'mezid, that they get misa? Again, this is a slight variant. We're not really talking about this case. We were talking about when you're putter for doing something b'mezid. So says the Gemara, hazy b'meila b'misa. Who is the one who says that if you do meila b'mezid, that you're chayiv misa? Answers the Gemara, Rebbe. It's the Shita Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Titania, the Brisa writes, hazy b'meila, Rebbe Omer misa, v'chachamim Omer be'azhara. If a person does meila b'mezid, so then the din is that they are chayiv misa, says Rebbe. And in contrast, v'chachamim Omer be'azhara. The chachamim say that you only get a lav. The language of azhara is a reference to an isser deoraisa. So you've done a lav, you've done something wrong, but it's not an onesh misa. Says the Gemara, my time of the Rebbe. What is the reason why Rebbe holds that if a person does meila b'mezid, that they are going to be held chayiv misa? Answers the Gemara, and now we're connecting back to our sugya. It's from the world of truma. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Abo, Gamar chet mitruma. Gamar, learned, right? He has a tradition. Technically, the word Gemara, it means learned, but we use it in a kind of a more of a casual, colloquial way, which is to mean that it's part of our tradition. We have a tradition, chet mitruma. And here is what the Gzeira Shabbat teaches us. Two things. First, ma truma b'misa, af me'ila b'misa. That's number one. And number two is, and this is where Rav Chia bar Avin says that Rabba and Rav Sheshes don't like his kal v'chomer from the bottom. Umina, fifth line of Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph. And what do we also learn from this kal v'chomer from chet? Umina ma truma bekezayis af me'ila bekezayis. And as you can see, they don't like the shiur of less than a kezayis. They only say that it's more than a kezayis. So he says that the kal v'chomer is really not a great kal v'chomer either. Umaskif la Rav Papa, and this is where we're coming back to our starting point. Many layers here. We started out by saying, how did Rav Papa understand Abba Shaul? Umaskif la Rav Papa. We're going to see from Rav Papa's question what he really thinks. Mimai de Rebbe. Yesterday we learned about the machlokas between the Rabbanan and Abba Shaul. and the Rabbanan said that there needs to be a kezayis in order to violate the Isser Truma. Right? We said that's the only way you trigger the punishment of Karen v'chomesh is if it's a kezayis. So we see here by Me'ila, based on the Kal v'chomer of Chet, that we also see that there's a shiur of a kezayis. So the Gemara says, how do we know that Rebbe agrees to the shiur of kezayis, of the Rabbanan by Truma? Maybe he doesn't. So Dilma, perhaps, maybe Rebbe over here, who says that when a person does Me'ila b'mezid, that he gets Misa. So he says, Dilma, perhaps Ka'aba Shol Svirle, maybe really he holds like Abba Shol, that all you need is that it needs to be a Shava Pruta. It doesn't need to be a Kezayis. Ka'aba Shol Svirle, Ka'aba Shol Svirle, the Amar, Yesh Bashava Pruta Afal Gavda Lesba Kezayis. Now this question alone disproves Rav Papa from yesterday. Rav Papa from yesterday understood the machlokes about Truma and when you pay Karen v'chomesh as follows. The Rabbanan hold you need a Kezayis, and Abba Shol holds, yes, you need a Kezayis, but it also needs to be a Shava Pruta. It needs a value. It needs a dollar amount. Otherwise, you don't get the punishment. Here, how does Rav Papa frame it out? That according to Abba Shol, even if it's only a Shava Pruta, and it's less than a Kezayis, you're still going to be held accountable. That's how we framed this question here. Rav Papa who Damar Abba Shol Tarte Bay. Yesterday, you said that Abba Shol, Rav Papa, yesterday in Daf Yomi, you said that Abba Shol has two standards for Karen v'chomesh. It's Kezayis and Shava Pruta. Yet here, the way you framed your question from this Mishnah about Hazid b'Me'ila, there you said it was only about Shava Pruta. Therefore, says the Gemara, we therefore see that even Rav Papa holds that when we go back to yesterday's sugya, the conclusion of yesterday's sugya is that how do we understand the machlokes between the Rabbanan and Abba Shol in regards to when you're obligated to pay Karen v'chomesh by Truma? It is according to the Chachamim when you have a Kezayis, even if it's not worth a Shava Pruta. And in contrast, according to Abba Shol, when you have something that's a Shava Pruta, even if it isn't a Kezayis. That's how we would understand the machlokes from yesterday. Now, we're discussing this Bryce on the bottom of the page, and we brought it all for this lengthy disproof of Rav Papa. However, there still are two more versions of one of the Kal v'chomers in our Gemara that we're going to go through. Quarter of the way down, Lamed Gimel Lamed Aleph. Mar Bered Ravina Amar Hachik Amar. Here's what the final Kal v'chomer should be in the Bryce on the bottom of Lamed Beis Mid Beis. Says the Gemara, Lo, you cannot use your Kal v'chomer. You cannot use your Kal v'chomer to teach us what you think is obvious, that when someone does the Isser b'mezid that they are pater. Says the Gemara, Lo, you can't say that. Imamers b'shar mitzvos shelo asa bahen she'ein miskaven kimiskaven. By most mitzvos in the Torah, when you are ein miskaven, you don't intend to violate the Isser, but then you end up violating the Isser. We don't equate them. Says the Gemara as an example. Shim miskaven lach toches hatalush. It's Shabbos morning. You take a blade. You go down to cut a cucumber that was in your brain. That cucumber was off the tree before Shabbos, and you realize after you cut, oh shoot, it's attached to the ground. So says the Gemara, by all the Isurim in the Torah, Shabbos is just the paradigm for this. You're not chayiv for that. Your ein miskaven is not miskaven. You weren't intending to do anything wrong. You were intending to cut a cucumber like any other day of the week, but it's fine. And if it's talush, if it's not connected to anything, you're good. So by shar mitzvos, when it comes to all other areas of halacha, if I'm ein miskaven, I don't intend on violating something, but the act that I did ended up being a violation, pater. You're not liable for that. That wasn't what you wanted to do. So it says the Gemara, if it's true all over Shas, but Tomar b'me'ila, that's not true by me'ila. If you intended to warm yourself with feathers that were chulin, let's say our down coats, and let's say that one coat is stuffed with truma feathers. Okay, that's a problem. And you intended to take the non-truma blanket, the non-truma coat, that's what you intended to do. But there, by Me'ila, the rule doesn't apply. By Me'ila, if you were ein miskaven, I meant to pick up the one that was chulin, but I inadvertently picked up the coat that was not. It was Me'ila. You violated an Isser D'oraisa. So therefore, says the Gemara, the first Kal v'chomer in our Brisa is rejected by this Kal v'chomer, because Me'ila is different than Shar mitzvos. Says the Gemara, still a fourth option. Halfway down the page, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar, Hachi Kamar. Here is a svara, here's a Kal v'chomer that we would use. Lo, you can't say that it should be obvious to us from a Kal v'chomer that when one does a Maisa b'mezid that they're pater, because im amris b'shar mitzvos shekein lo mischai bahen she'ein misasek kimisasek. By most areas of the Torah, We don't take a case of ein misasek and make it misasek. What is this talking about? Take a look at this example in the Gemara. Shim niskavein lehagbia esatalush. What was your intention? Your intention was to pick up something that was talush. Instead, you did a totally different ma'isa. The chatach esamachubar, and you ended up cutting that which was attached. It's misasek, right? It wasn't your intention. It's misasek. Says the Gemara, shepater tomar b'meila. But when it comes to meila, shim hoshid yado bit lekli. If by meila you put your hand near a kli and it has oil that is that you're not allowed to use, it would be meila if you use it. And then litol chevetz v'sach yado b'shemen shel kodesh, and you got oil on your hands. That's me'ila. We don't say this idea of misasik. I was planning to do X and instead I did Y. We don't do that here. This is the fourth kal v'chomer, and that brings us to the end of this little sugya. The first amud that we've learned so far is really primarily all about this brisa, which was intended to reject Rav Papa's understanding of Abba Shaul. Rav Papa understood Abba Shaul that in order to trigger the punishment of Truma, of Karen and Chomesh, you had to do, according to version 1 of Rav Papa, we thought maybe that it needed two standards. Number one, it had to be a Kezayis, and number two, it had to be a Shava Pruta. Comes along this brisa, and Rav Papa's questioning of this brisa throughout that teaches us that Rav Papa misunderstood, or we misunderstood Rav Papa, that really Abba Shaul holds that in order to trigger Karen v'Chomesh, all you need is the Shava Pruta. Yesterday, we spoke about the difference between paying back Truma b'damim or b'mida. Do we pay back cash value? I ate $1.50 of your food, I'm paying you back $1.50. Or do we say I ate a loaf of bread, therefore I'm paying back a loaf of bread, even if the price is not the same? In that machlokes, we said, Kitanoi, that we had a machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri that was a paradigm it was the precedent case from the times of the Tanaim. And in that brisa, there was the following line, Omar Mar, this is where we are, 2/3 of the way down, Lamed Gimel Lamed Aleph. Says the Gemara, Omar Mar, Bamedvar Mamurim, when do we say that the chametz, remember the case here, you ate chametz on Pesach, that was truma. Okay, that was not a good thing to do. So it says the Gemara, Bamedvar Mamurim, how is it that you can create a case of truma that was chametz, the mafresh truma vehechmitza, when first the truma was established as truma, it was separated first, right? I'm a regular guy, I'm giving my truma to a kohen, I make the separation, and then it becomes chametz. That's what the Gemara says, mafresh truma vehechmitza. Aval hifresh chametz truma. If I separated out truma that was already chametz, divrei hakol eina kedusha. Everyone agrees that would not be considered truma. It started out chametz. It's not going to be truma. Says the Gemara, minahani mili. From where do we know that this is true? We'll see two answers to this. One here and one on the final line of the page. Here's answer number one. How do we know that the chametz has to be, that the truma has to be separated first to become truma without being chametz at the same time? Says the Gemara, a drasha. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar Kra, the pasuk says, Titain lo, give it to him, give it to the Kohen, v'lo le'oro, not to be consumed as fire. It should be edible. It should be something that he can actually eat. So that shows you that it can't be truma that's chametz. It couldn't be chametz first, because if it was chametz first, it can't be truma, because you can't give it to the Kohen, because it says about Titain lo. And this is not something that you can give to him. And give here is not hana. Give is for achila. Give is for achila, so that doesn't work. So that's why Rav Nachman says we know that in this case it can't be chametz before it is truma, because if it was chametz first, then it would never be truma, because the truma would be ineligible for the kohen. Masi Rav Huna Bered Rav Yoshua. Rav Huna Bered Rav Yoshua brings a beautiful question from another area of Shas. Wait 1 second. Ein tormin min hatruma min hatmeya letahora. You're not allowed to give from tmeya to tahora. You can't give a kohen tamei truma. V'im taram b'shogeg, if accidentally you did, the din is truma so truma. But why? If you give a tmeya truma to a kohen, he can't eat it. Says the Gemara, ve'amai lema. This should trigger the drasha. Lo, we should have to give it to him. V'lo le'oro. It's not usable for him. He can't eat it. He can burn it. That's true. But titain lo, the drasha by the truma means that he has to be able to eat it. You were just telling me the reason that I know that the truma couldn't be chametz first was because if it was chametz first, it would be inedible for the kohen, and then it wouldn't even be truma. Yet here by truma tmeya, you seem to have no problem at all. So why over here are you allowing us to give truma tmeya when we're not allowed to give truma that's chametz? At least you should be yotze. At least b'di'evid. It's not a good idea, but you should be yotze b'di'evid, just like you are here. Remember, look at the language, v'im taram, which always means b'di'evid. If you accidentally gave truma tmeya, you're yotze. So why not over here? Why by our case are we saying that that's not truma at all? Answers the Gemara, Lokashya, Hasam, Haisalo shas kosher, hachalo haisalo shas kosher. Hasam, in the new case that we just learned, in the case where someone has truma tmeya, at least at some point it had a shas kosher. It had a time when it wasn't tameh. It had a time when it was truma tahora and it became tameh. Understood. However, hacha, in our case of the truma, which is in our case with truma, which is chametz, says the Gemara, hacha lo haisa lo shas kosher. Over here in our case, there never was a shas kosher because the way that it became chametz, the way that it became truma was once it was already chametz. Udelo haisa lo shas kosher hechidami. How do we know? What's the case here? Udelo haisa lo shas kosher hechidami. How do we know that it didn't become truma before it became chametz? Kigon de ichmetz b'mechubar. It actually became chametz while it was still attached to the ground. That's what happened, is that it was still attached to the ground. Imagine these wheat stalks. They're leaned over in a bucket of water. And hichmetz, they began to leaven a little bit. They began to become chametz. So in our case, there was never a shas kosher. Aval, says the Gemara, ichmetz betalush. What if it became chametz after it separated? Hachanami de kidsha. Would we in fact say to kidsha that this would become truma? Amar le in, yes we would. We would say that chametz that became separated would have the status of truma if it became chametz after it was separated. Amar le in, yes, we would say that way. And he quotes a pasuk in Daniel, b'gzeras irin piskama, at the decree of the greats. Literally, irin means malach and it means angels. Here it's talking about talmidei chachamim. He's just a play on words here. B'gzeras irin piskama. These words were decreed by the greats, by the rabbis. V'mamar kedishin she'ilta. And the statement of the holy ones is the answer. Everyone does agree to this, that if the chametz, if the wheat was separated first and then became chametz, that it would have the status of truma. Kiyasa Rav Huna b'rei Rav Yoshua, he answered a little bit differently. And if you take a look at Rashi, the last line of Rashi, Dibur HaMaschil Rav Huna b'rei Rav Yoshua Amar, he says, Afilu b'shehichmetz b'talush namika Amar de'ena kedusha. He says that even when the chametz is separated, it still won't become chametz. It still won't have the status of truma at that point. So let's turn to the top of Lamed Gimel and understand this shita. So it says, Kiasa Rav Huna b'rei Rav Yoshua Amar, he said, Amar Kra, the pasuk says Reshis. What does the pasuk say? Reshis. If you look at the full pasuk, it says Reshis tegancha tiroshcha v'tzarecha, Reshis geisoncha titen lo. This is the mitzvah of truma. We have to give the truma to a kohen. So Reshis, the Reshis is sheshireha nikarin leYisrael. We're talking here about truma. Once I separate the truma, so the truma becomes kadosh. Everything else in the pile is edible for Yisrael. So that is going to be our parameter. Yatzisazu, that's to exclude our case of trumas chametz she'ein shirani karin, and therefore it can't be included in the list of things that the kohen can eat, and therefore it's excluded. Good. New sugya. Yasi Rav Acha bar Rav Avia kamed Rav Chizda. Yasi v'amar mishmei Rav Yochanan. What about the following case? These rabbis were having a conversation. Anavim shenitmu. You have grapes that are tamei. I'll just ask the question outside. Is the inside of the grape tamei also, or just the outside of the grape? It almost sounds like a ridiculous question. We would have thought the whole grape was tamei. So that's the Gemara's question here. The Gemara says, Anavim shenitmu. Do we say that there's a way to make the wine tahor? Answers the Gemara, yeah, sure, why not? Says the Gemara, Dorchan pachos mikibetza. As long as you crush the grapes, but the volume of grapes that you crush are less than the shiur of a kibetza. Why less than a shiur of a kibetza? Because halachically speaking, midrabanan, in order for a food to have the capacity to transmit tuma to another food, the initial food has to be a kibetza. So says the Gemara, I've got a chap. When we crush the grapes, what we're going to do is crush them in shiurim that are less than a kibetza, and therefore, even though the grape may be tamei in some way, shape, or form, it won't get to the wine because the shiur is too small. It's a kibetza. Says the Gemara, ve'yenon kasher l'nesachin. Not only is it kasher, the wine, but you can even use it for nisuch hamizbeach. You can even use the wine for korbanos. Alma, what do we see? We see that kasavar mashkin mifkad pekide. It's as if the liquids inside the grapes are in their own little bubble. They're totally separated, and we don't treat them as the same as the outer part. I don't know if it's the flesh, the skin. I don't know where the distinction is, because if you cut a grape open, everything is consistent except for the skin. So it must be the outer part, the skin only, and everything on the inside is mifkad pekide. It's its own separate world. Leimas kamitame. How then would there ever be inferi tuma? L'chisachidu. It's when you squeeze it. But here, l'chisachidu, when in fact you do squeeze it, leise l'shiure. It's lacking the kibetza. It's lacking the volume that would enable food to transfer tumah from one to the next. Says the Gemara, if that's true, then why does it have to be less than a kibetza? Ihachi kibetza nami. It should even be if it was exactly a kibetza. Why? Because the moment you squeeze it, now it's less than a kibetza. So that's what the Gemara is saying here. And we actually have a case in a Mishnah like this. The Mishnah writes 7 lines down. The Mishnah writes, Tamei meis shesachat zeisim ve'anavim kibetza mechuvenes. A person who's tamei meis and he squeezes out olives or grapes, and the volume that he squeezes out is exactly the size of a beitza. It is exactly the minimum threshold at which a food has the capacity to give tumah. Says the Gemara, what's the din? Says the Mishnah, tehorin. So why in our case did we have to say it's pachos mi kibetza? Should have said it's beitza mechuvenes. It should have been exactly a kibetza. That should also be sufficient. Says the Gemara, hasam di'i avad. Over there, that's only b'di'evet. Hacha lichatchila. Here, what we're talking about is that it's not okay to do that lichatchila. Gzeira del ma'asi lemeva yoser mi kibetza. Here we were just concerned. We said everything up to a kibetza is fine. You want to get all technical. If technically you did it, it was kibetza, it's fine. We would still not say that there's tumah, just like we had the Mishnah by the Tamei Meis who squeezed the grapes and the olives. There too, it's mechuvenes. Beitza mechuvenes is also fine. But here we have a gzeira derabanan that we don't want to do a kibetza. We're afraid that people may end up doing more than that, and then the food would become tamei. Amar le Rav Chizda. These are some of the lines that it looks like they lack midos, but Hashem, we would never say such a thing about such great people. Man sais lach ul Rabbi Yochanan Rabcha. Do people ever listen to the two of you? Man sais lach. Does anyone ever listen to you ul Rabbi Yochanan Rabcha? V'chituma shebahen lehechan halcha. If the outside of the grape is tamei, then what happened to the tumah on the inside of the grape? Alma kasavar mashkin mivlai bliye. Therefore, we assume that the liquids are just, it's an absorption. It's just part of the whole grape. Of course, it's going to be tamei. Once the food becomes tamei, all the contents of the food become tamei, and the wine inside is also tamei. Amar le, they said to him, well, wait a minute. We just learned a mission about this by a tamei meis. Ve'at lo tizbara demashkin mifkad pekide. How can you not say that the liquid is separate of the grapes? After all, Ve'atnan, we just saw this Mishnah 5 lines ago. Ve'atnan, tamei meishes shesachat zeisim v'anavim mechuvenes kibetza. It actually says kibetza mechuvenes above. It's reversed here. I don't know if there's a reason, but we saw the case of tamei meis where when he squeezed a kibetza and it was exactly mechuvenes, that's nice, tehorin. So if you want to say that the liquid is considered a separate entity of the grape, fine. Then mishum hachi tehorin. Then I understand why in the case of tamei meis, I understand that. I understand in the case of tamei meis why then it's tahor. Eli amris Rav Chizda, if you're going to say mivla bliye, then really the outside of the grape and the inside are the same. Amai tehorin. Why in the case of the tamei meis would it be tahor? According to you, Rav Chizda, the flesh of the grape and the outside of the grape are the same. No difference at all. Amar le hacha b'may yaskinan. Rav Chizda says you have to know what you're talking about. We're talking about be'anavim shelo huchsheru. We're talking about grapes that have yet to become moist for liquid. Le'emas miskashre. And when do they ever become moist for the sake of transferring tuma? L'chisachidu. That's when you start squeezing it. And kisachidu bater lehu shiur. So Rav Chizda has a twist. It's his own little. It's his own shtickle on how to explain this. And says the Gemara, it has to be this way. Di lo temahachi. If you don't say this, then something that we learned in a brisa yesterday doesn't make sense. What would not make sense? Hadatanya, we're 2/3 of the way down, Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis. The brisa writes, Halemazeh dome. We said this yesterday. The trumas tutin va'anavim. We said that when it comes to strawberries and grapes, shenitma that became tamei she'ein lo balo heter achila lo heter asaka. We said there that those fruits have no heter achila and no heter asaka. They cannot be eaten and they can't even be used for fuel. So says the Gemara, that's not true. Because now that I know that there's a way to extract the liquid from these foods, ha heter achila nami ispe. I could have strawberry juice. I could have grape juice extracted. I have a way to get achila from here. So I don't understand. I have a way of extracting these. So why yesterday? If today what you're saying is that there's a way to extract liquid from a grape so that it doesn't have the same status of isser as the grape itself, then why yesterday didn't you say that? Yesterday we spoke about strawberries, tutin, we spoke about anavim, we spoke about grapes. There you said that less be'achila, you can't eat them. That's not true. It's not correct. We have a way to do it. So says the Gemara as a response, 12 lines from the bottom, Amar Rava Absolutely, you're right, midoraisa. You're 100% correct. It's edible midoraisa. We could extract the liquid in a way where it wouldn't be usher. However, gzera, dilma asi behu lidei takala. We are concerned that you may make an error. Amar le'abai michai shimla takala. You think all of a sudden we're concerned about an error? We have a brisa that says, "Madlikim bepasu v'shemen shel truma shenitmes." You're allowed to keep bread around the house and oil around the house that's tamei. Well, if you're allowed to do that, then why can't I look at this food, which is truma tmeya? It's the strawberry and it's the grape that's truma tmeya. You told me I can't extract the liquid because of takala. I might make a mistake. Why? I'm allowed to burn bread, and I'm allowed to. And what's the other case? I'm allowed to use the oil. Amar le, it's a little different. The case of the bread and the oil is different than the case of the tutin ve'anavim. How so? Amar le, pas. Where's the bread stored? Zarik le'ben ha'itzim. You're not keeping it in the bread basket. It's being stored with all the wood fuel. That's good. You're never going to make a mistake. Shemen shel truma, rami le'bichli ma'uz. And the oil you're keeping in it's like those big canisters. They're labeled as tamei. It has like the skeleton on it. Don't eat it. Not for you. So it's clear that you're not going to make a mistake. But over here, we are concerned that you're going to make a mistake because you may extract a liquid incorrectly. You may do it when it's more than a kibetza. So Rava says, not allowed. Gufa always means that we're going to analyze something that we just learned, and this is right above, 2 lines above. We're going to learn the sugya, a little bit of the sugya about truma tmeya, still more. Gufa madlikin bepasu v'shemen shel truma shenitmes. We are allowed, says the Gemara, to be madlik bepas, to use bread as fuel, and also to use shemen shel truma shenitmes, to use oil that became tamei as truma. Abaye Amar mishmei de Chizkiya. Abaye says in the name of Chizkiya. The Rava Amar Debei Rav Yitzchak bar Marta, and he says in the name of Rav Yitzchak bar Marta, Amar Rav Huna, Lo shanu ella pas. When we say that the bread can be used as fuel, it's only the final product of bread that can be used as fuel. Aval chite lo. But with wheat, with uncooked wheat, you're not allowed to do that because we're afraid that you may make a mistake. We're afraid that you may bake it into food, and it's tamei. It's truma tmeya. But we're afraid that you may come to eat it. Says the Gemara, Shema yavo bohen lidei takala. So we see that we are concerned here when it comes to raw, unprocessed wheat. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan Amar afilu chite. You can even use raw, uncooked wheat for fuel. Ve'amai. Why are you allowed to do that, Rabbi Yochanan? Nechush dilma asi bahen lidei takala. Maybe we should say that that you might make a mistake. Oh, look, there's some wheat. I'm going to go grind it up. I'm going to turn it into flour and make some bread. Why wasn't Rabbi Yochanan concerned? Says the Gemara, in fact, he was, and that's why he did the following thing. Kida Amar Ravashi, turning to the top of Lamadal and Radal, Bishlito Meista. To shalik is to boil something. What they did is they took the truma tmeya, they boiled it, and they threw it on top of the wood. So you'd never make the mistake. It was chitin, it was wheat, but it was kind of like destroyed wheat. You made it gross, but it still functions as fuel. That, says Rabbi Yochanan, is what we mean by that's what we mean when we say that chitin, the wheat that's not bread that we are allowed to use for fuel, that's only b'shlikta o me'ista. Hachanami, here in our case as well, Rav Ashi said it elsewhere. We'll see where he said it. Hachanami, here in our case too, b'shlikta me'ista, you take the wheat and you boil it and you throw it on top of the wood and then it's disgusting. You'll never make the mistake of making bread out of it. Now, Rav Ashi was the one who gave us this answer of b'shlikta me'ista, who says that you can take chitin, you can take the wheat that is not yet bread, and you can just ruin it. The Hecha Itmar de Rav Ashi, says the Gemara, where does Rav Ashi get his din from? Says the Gemara, aha, on the following case. To Amar Rabbi Avin bar Rav Ach Amar Rav Yitzchak, Abba Shaul, the person Abba Shaul, who we spoke about earlier today and yesterday at length in regards to Truma. So here, he was the Gabal Shel Beis Rebbe Haya. He was the guy who made all of the challah. He's the one who made the dough. A Gabal means to knead in Hebrew. V'hayu mechamin lo, they would warm up the area for him to cook. Chamin, they'd warm up the heat. Bechitin shel truma tmeya, lalush bahen isa betara. He would use truma tmeya as fuel in order to make truma betahara. Amai, nechush dilma asi behuli de takala. Why are we not concerned about that case that he's going to take the wheat that is not yet in the bread form? Why aren't we concerned that he's going to make that into bread? So there, in that case, Amar Rav Ashi, he said, B'shlikta me'ista, and we brought that answer back to our case, but that was the real case where it started. The case of Shlikta me'ista didn't start by our case, it started by the case of Rav Ashi, by the case of Abba Shaul, where he was using truma tmeya as fuel in order to make truma tahora. No problem, as long as it's the gross form. But you're right, Taka, it's right. If you just have raw wheat and it's tmeya, you're not allowed to have it around the house. That's correct. There we are concerned. Abaye bar Avin v'Rav Chananya bar Avin tanu trumas be Rabba. Abaye and Rav Chanina, they were brothers, both the children of Avin. Tanu, they learned Trumos, they learned Maseches Trumos Bei Rabba. They learned Maseches Trumos with Rabba, the great Amora Rabba. While they were outside the base medrash, Paga Bahu Rabba Bar Masna. Rabba Bar Masna walks over to these two brothers, Abaye and Rav Chananya, and he says to them, Amar Lahu, the singular to the plural, he says to them, My Amrisu Trumos to Beimar. What did you guys learn about Maseches Trumos in Yeshiva today? What are you guys learning? So they're smart. Amrulay, they said to him, get to the point. What do you want to just know? What is your question? Just ask it already. Amar Lahu, he said to them, all right, I'll go straight to the punch. Tanan, there's a Mishnah Maseches Trumos. Shesile Trumos shenitzmu u'shesalan. Let's say that there are saplings, trees that are not currently in the ground. We sometimes see this when they're planting trees. They're pre-grown in a healthier climate with perfect dirt. They pick it up, they put a big hole in the ground, they drop it in. So the sapling, let's say it became tameh while it was out of the ground. When something is attached to the ground, it cannot become tameh. It can only become tameh when it's separated from the ground. So tanan, shesile trumos shenitzmu. What if the saplings, when they were out of the ground, became tameh? Ushesalan. And then you planted the saplings again. So, says the Gemara, a strange split answer. Tehorim milatame. They can't become tameh because they're now mechuber lekarka. They're not connected to the ground. And at the same time, ve'asurin milechol. At the same time, you're not allowed to eat it. Asks the Gemara, if you're saying that they cannot become tameh anymore, amay asur milechol, then what's the isser? So this was the question that Rabba Bar Masna asked Abaye and Rav Chananya, who were the children of Bar Avin. Amrule, in the plural, Amru, they said to him, Hachi Amar Rabba. We heard shiur on this already, and I'll tell you what my Rebbe said. Rabba said, my asurin. When this line says that it's asurin, who is it asurin for? Says the Gemara, asurin lazarin, like regular halachos of truma. It's just that the tree is going to be, meaning it has regular dinim of truma. It's attached to the ground, and it can't become tameh when it's attached to the ground, and it's asur to eat for regular people. Like truma is always asur to eat for regular people. Good. What does that mean? He says back to them, what are you trying to teach me? That gidule truma? You're trying to tell me that when you put the tree back in the ground, that it still has the status of truma? That we know. Tanina, gidule truma. We already have a brisa that says that when you put the tree back in the ground, it has the status of truma. That can't be pshat in the Mishnah that I just asked you about by the saplings, because we already have a brisa that says that explicitly. So that can't be what Rabbah meant. If you say that, no, that's not what we meant. We didn't mean that when you put the tree in the ground that the tree has a status of truma. We mean that when you put the tree in the ground and then it grows something, that new thing, not the fact that the sapling was put in the ground, but that now it's growing 5 weeks later. You got a fruit on the tree, right? So that's also as a din of truma. That's true when the tree is still around. Hanami tenina, we have that too. Hatevel, in a case of tevel, where gidulav mutarin bedavar shekala zaro. Hatevel, it was out of the ground. Rashi here at length points out you did miruach hakri and then you planted it again. So then gidulav, when you take the tevel and you replant it, you have a bulb of some kind and then you're able to replant it. So it's not like you cut a harvest, it's a bulb of something, you put it back in the ground. So there we said by tevel, gidulav mutarin bedavar shezaro kala, that we say that it's mutter to benefit from the growth with something that's bedavar shezaro kala, where the seeds ended. Aval bedavar she'ein zaro kala, if all the seeds are still present, if the initial tree is still there, afilu gidule gidulin asur b'achila. So we already have a brisa that says that. So you can't even tell me it's about gidule gidulin, about the sapling that's growing in the ground. It cannot be that. So ishtiku, the Talmidim of Rabbah didn't know what to say. This is Abaye and Rav Chananya Bar Avin. They didn't know what to say. Amar lei Taka, good point. They finally opened up. They said, Midi shmielach beha. Did you hear a pshat in here? You know, this is like the person who asks you a shaila because they have an answer that they want to share. So that's exactly what happened here. Because look what happened. They said, do you have an answer? He's like, well, actually, I do. Yes. The question that I asked you about, I have an answer. Amar lahu, the guy said to them, the guy Rava Bar Masna said to them, Hachi Amar Rav Sheshes. Here's pshat. My asurin, what does it mean when it says that after you replant the sapling that it's asur? Asurin, the kohanim? That even the kohanim are not allowed to eat it. Hoil ve'ifselu lehu behesach hadas. Because you had a hesach hadas, because your brain was not paying attention to it for one short period of time when it was being replanted. So at that time, therefore, you had hesach hadas. It may have become puzzle. So the Talmidim said back to him, they said, hold on one second. Hold on. Shapir. If you say that whenever there's hesach hadas, we instantly and halachically assume that which you were not paying attention to, in this case the sapling, is completely tameh beguf. We just assume that it's absolutely tameh without even asking a shaila. I understand your shita. I understand your isra on the kohanim. If you say that makes sense. However, if you're just saying that it's a psul tuma, and in this case, it's not simple to understand this from the Gemara, but the Mefarshim explained that it means that you're not sure if it became tameh, and out of safek, out of concern, you're avoiding it, says the Gemara, and with this, they reject Rabbi Bar Masna's answer of Rav Sheshes. And how do we know that these two shitas exist? And with this, we will close for the evening. The itmar hesach hadas, to itmar always means in the times of the Amoraim. The machlokes of hesach hadas is as follows. What if someone doesn't pay attention to the world of truma? Says the Gemara, Rav Yochanan Amar pasul tuma, psul tuma have. It's a psul tuma, meaning we're not sure if it became tameh. Rav Shimon ben Lakish Amar psul haguf have, that it's inherently going to be problematic. Rav Yochanan Amar psul tuma have, he's not sure if it became tameh, and she'im yavo Eliyahu yitaharena, if Eliyahu Hanavi would show up and say, by the way, that food is tahor, so then shomen lo, we would embrace that. We're just not sure what happened. And the last sheet is Rav Shimon ben Lakish Omer psul haguf have, it's inherently puzzle. And even if she'im yavo Eliyahu yitaharena, he comes and says it's really tahor, ein shomen lo, we would not say that. We're giving a status of puzzle haguf. So we're going to stop here at this point. We'll pick up with Eisiveh on Shabbos. There was a typo in the announcement. It said Daf Yomi was at 2:45. That's not correct. It's at 2:55. I will put out a note on WhatsApp as well to make sure everybody knows. But shiur on Shabbos will start at 2:55. Wishing you all a beautiful night.
Thank you to Mark for sponsoring dinner tonight.
Thank you to Mark for sponsoring dinner.